Today, I want to talk about the hot topic of will my insulin resistance come back once I reverse it, or is it kind of a one and done thing? I got this message in my direct messages or somewhere on Instagram, maybe on my as a comment on my story, but I thought this needs to be addressed because many people might think, well, I'll work on my insulin resistance, I'll get it reversed, and then I'll go back to what I was doing before. And trust me, friends, that is not the mindset that you want to have. So it's just like anything else, any other disease state that gets you sick, right? Like it's your lifestyle that is playing the biggest role. So if you've led a lifestyle that has led you to insulin resistance, and that is true for the vast majority of us, myself included, my lifestyle led me to insulin resistance, even though I didn't even know I had it. I had normal blood sugars, normal lipid panels. My hemoglobin A1C was normal. My fasting glucose was normal. I never had big weight issues, but I had insulin resistance. And so because I had insulin resistance, and I honestly don't know to what degree I had it because I worked to start reversing it. And I went into an intermittent fasting lifestyle with lower carb and really clearing out most grains because I figured out they made me bloated. They gave me blood sugar spikes and I just didn't tolerate them very well. I have very strong type 2 diabetes and also fatty liver and also PCOS in my family. And those are all manifestations of insulin resistance. I did not know this until I was a couple of years into these protocols. I was doing these protocols mainly to be healthier and to feel better, to reduce my bloating, to get my blood sugar a little bit more regulated, but I never tested my fasting insulin until I was already 2 years into the process. And by that time, it was in the moderately high zone. It was 10.7 about 2 years after I started intermittent fasting, and I was doing some longer fasts as well. At least one 24-hour fast a week and a couple of even longer fasts here and there. And I still had an insulin level of 10.7. And just for reference, I look for a fasting insulin. And remember, this is not fasting glucose. They are not the same thing. A fasting insulin level of about 2 to 6, optimally 6 to 12 being kind of starting to moderate insulin resistance. And then over 12, more long-standing insulin resistance, if that's where your fasting insulin is at. And mine was at 10.7 after 2 years. And the last time I got it checked, it was 7.5, but that was quite a while ago. And I keep saying this on the podcast, like I need to get it checked again. If you follow me on Instagram and you follow me pretty closely, you know I've had just a ton of things going on in my personal life. So I will be honest, checking my labs hasn't been at the forefront of my mind, but I was a couple years in before I even measured my fasting insulin because I didn't know to do it. Nobody ever talked about it until more recently. And unfortunately, as a registered dietitian, I was never told about a fasting insulin test. Um, no one knew to test for it. No one knew how to interpret it. No one knew it. No one was talking about insulin resistance. I had to learn all of that on my own. And even now, many dietitians unfortunately don't know much about insulin resistance, and that it is the base root cause of so many chronic disease. So let's talk about that for a minute. So we're talking about, do I have to keep going with this lifestyle once I reverse my insulin resistance, or can I go back to what I was doing before? So let's talk about the diseases that manifest as a result of insulin resistance and metabolic issues. We know that prediabetes and type 2 diabetes are directly caused by insulin resistance and blood sugar dysregulation. They are basically carbohydrate intolerance. So you're not metabolizing, utilizing carbohydrates, and it is absolutely crazy that our guidelines tell us to take in 50 to 60% of our intake from carbohydrates when the vast majority of the adult population and children in this day and age have some degree of carbohydrate intolerance in the form of insulin resistance. So fatty liver is also a manifestation of insulin resistance. And a lot of people think fatty liver is a result of too much fat in the diet, and that is not the biggest cause. We have alcoholic fatty liver, which is mainly caused by alcohol, but then non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is just exploding, and that is because of the high carb, high sugar, high grains, high processed food, lots of sugary drinks, fruit juices, drinking anything in the form of sugar really exacerbates fatty liver. And it's a result of too many carbohydrates and carb intolerance, which is converted to fat. That fat accumulates in the liver and the organs. And I just want to say, do not ignore fatty liver if you have been diagnosed. And diagnosis of fatty liver is often missed because it's hard to do. You don't have, a lot of times you don't have the labs to tell you. You might have some elevated liver enzymes like the ALT, the AST might be a little bit elevated, but in a lot of circumstances, you won't be able to really tell that you have fatty liver unless you get a scan of your liver or an MRI, something that's showing that it's fatty. And just a little side note, my mother had fatty liver for a very long time. I have no idea how long, honestly. And she had her ALT and AST were elevated for at least 12 years that I know of, that I was able to go back into her medical chart to see, was told to just watch it, wasn't told how to reverse it. I'm sure her primary care physician did not know how to help her, but it advanced to cirrhosis and then cancer. Now she's in hospice. So don't ignore fatty liver. And if you think you might have it, ask for a scan or an MRI to see if you can see if it's advanced to fatty liver. So anyway, fatty liver is reversible up until the point of cirrhosis. Once it's scarred in the form of cirrhosis, you can't reverse it any longer. Fatty liver is a manifestation. Polycystic ovarian syndrome is a manifestation almost always of insulin resistance. It's basically insulin resistance of the ovary. Most blood pressure issues are a direct result of insulin resistance. You will hear in the media and from your conventional doctor that it's a salt issue, it's a sodium issue, but that is not true. The base root cause of almost all, of course, there are always few outliers, but almost all blood pressure issues can be directly linked to insulin resistance. And when you fix your insulin resistance and get your insulin back down into normal ranges, blood pressure issues resolve. Most lipid issues are also a direct cause of insulin resistance. Cancer is a metabolic disease. I'll be releasing a podcast episode very, very soon with Dr. Thomas Seyfried, and he talks about cancer as a metabolic disease. And I saw that with my mother, with her fatty liver and advancing to cirrhosis and then to scarring and then to cancer. All of these manifestations of insulin resistance, and of course, obesity and weight loss resistance, most often, I should say, is a direct cause and a direct symptom of insulin resistance, not being able to burn your own body fat because you're stuck in carb metabolism and you're not utilizing carbohydrates correctly. So anyway, this all brings us to say that no, this is not a one and done. This is not, I'm going to bring my insulin levels down from 20 to 6 and then I'm done. And then I go back to what I was doing before. Now, most often insulin resistance is years in the making, right? By the time I even knew about this term or knew to test for it, I'm in my 40s. I was, I was healthy overall, or so I thought, but I was eating from the time I got up till the time I went to bed, even though it was healthy food. I was, grabbing the food here, food there, handful of this, handful of that. I was eating between 5 and 6 in the morning a lot of times before my morning run. I was, having a couple snacks after dinner sometimes. So I hardly had any fasting hours except for when I was sleeping. So you can see how insulin resistance will develop for most people, even when they're of normal weight. So I did not know this, of course, but it's just, 30 or 40 years of eating this way, spiking insulin, even if your carbohydrates are whole, real food, if you're eating too much carbohydrate too often, you're still going to, be calling on your body to bring those blood sugar levels down. So, for me, it took decades to develop, but I probably had it for many, many years before I knew. And how did I know this? I thought about food a lot. I rarely felt full, even after eating, full meals. I always love to eat big salads because it's like it filled me with some substance, at least for a couple of hours. Um, I thought about food a lot, so I was preoccupied with food, and this was because I wasn't eating enough protein and fat, and I was just overeating carbohydrates, and my insulin levels were high. Um, I had some skin issues, not major skin issues, but I had some blemishes, and I was like, I'm 40 years old. Why am I still getting blemishes? Some on my back, some on my chest. That all went away when I reversed my insulin resistance. And the main things were the preoccupation with food, being hungry, not feeling full, like full and nourished. And not being another big one for me was not being able to go a very long time without eating. It was only a couple hours and I would be eating again. And then the other thing, like I mentioned, I never had major weight issues, but I did have trouble maintaining I shouldn't say trouble, but it was really hard for me. Like I had to do a lot of things to maintain my weight where I was at. And I was always constantly thinking of it. Like, most of my family's overweight or obese. And I thought, okay, well, now I'm in my 40s, it's gonna catch up with me. And I just was waiting, waiting, waiting. Like, I'm going to gain weight at some point. I'm going to be overweight. And now I know, like, I'm at a lower weight than I was prior to all this. And I don't really go by weight, I go more by body composition. But my body composition is healthier than when I had insulin resistance for sure. Now, if I went back to that lifestyle, especially now, I just turned 48 and I started all of this I was probably 41, 42, somewhere in there, and reversed everything. Now I'm 48, now I'm definitely perimenopausal. I'm approaching menopause. It would be like, if I went back to my current or my past lifestyle, I would probably develop that insulin resistance pretty quickly compared to the years, decades that it took initially. Because my body, and your body kind of has a memory, right? It's like, I had problems with this before. Or, think about your weight too, and how, you lose some weight and it just kind of gets to that set point for a while and it's hard to budget again. It's like your body has a memory of issues that it used to have, and you have to kind of retrain it to be healthier and stay healthier. So if I went back to eating all the time, even if it was healthy carbohydrates, and I went back to eating very often, I am I'm not willing to do that and to experiment, but I know that those issues would come back. So yes, I mean, insulin resistance is one of those things that if you've had issues with it, you reverse it and you go back to what you were doing before, you're going to get ill again. And that's true for a lot of people who, lost a bunch of weight with a low insulin lifestyle, with intermittent fasting, bringing their insulin levels down, finally got to tap into burning body fat. For some reason or other, they went off the rails. They went back to their lifestyle that provoked more of an insulin response and higher levels of insulin. And all of a sudden, they're having the same issues as they had before. Now, I myself find it easy to sustain this lifestyle. This is the first time in my entire life that I have found, a way of eating, nutrition, the lifestyle that I lead, eating just a couple of times a day, not snacking, focusing on protein, getting fats in, really focusing on real foods, cooking my food at home most of the time, like this is very sustainable for me, where a lot of times we do fads or we do diets or we do, cycle menus that only are lasting a couple of weeks or, a couple of months. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, now we're back to what we were doing before. And while this is sustainable, it's just a sustainable lifestyle strategy and methods that actually make you feel good, stop you from having that preoccupation with food and level out the blood sugars, and you can keep, those disease states in check. So I myself, I've talked about how there's a ton of type 2 diabetes in my family, in particular my dad's side of the family. I used to worry about developing that, but I know now, I'm like, no, there's no reason for me to develop prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. Knowing what I know, keeping the insulin levels in check, keeping blood sugar spikes in check. And the other thing, of course, is the movement and the exercise that you're doing, getting movement after you eat, getting movement throughout the day, not sitting for long periods of time. And then, of course, really focusing on strength training. And again, being a woman of 48, I'm naturally going to lose some muscle mass if I don't strength train. I need more protein as I age than before. A lot of people think they need less protein as they age, but no, you do not break down and utilize the protein as efficiently as you did when you were younger. So you actually need more. And you're losing, your body is I don't know if degrading is the right word. But it's just needing more protein to be optimal. So keeping that strength training going, if you haven't started that, I highly encourage you to do so, because remember, insulin resistance is starting in the muscles and it's starting in the liver. And that all, again, has to do with carbohydrate metabolism, utilizing carbohydrate storage. Are those glycogen buckets that we have stored around our muscle tissue and in our liver for carbohydrates, are those buckets always full, or are you emptying those and giving your body room to place more carbohydrates as you eat it? So it's kind of like a big sink that fills and empties, fills and empties. The storage form of glucose is glycogen. And when you're eating carbohydrates, if you have a place for them to go, your sink is empty, that is going to be super helpful. So if you're getting movement and you're strength training, hard strength training sessions, I shouldn't say hard, but strength training sessions where you're actually utilizing all of the energy that's stored in the muscle and burning that out. So then when you do eat carbohydrate again, and we want to not go above a certain threshold of carbohydrate. But when you do eat it, you have a place for it to go. If you're not getting movement, you're not strength training, even if you're eating, a lesser amount of carbohydrates than you once were, if those glycogen buckets are still full because you're not ever emptying them by either reducing carbohydrates or getting activity and movement, there's nowhere for that carbohydrate to go. There's no place. The sink is full, and then that carbohydrate has to be converted, and it's converted into fat. If you're not burning it off, then the fat is stored. So hopefully that all makes sense. And yes, that was kind of a roundabout way of saying absolutely insulin resistance can come back and all the disease states that are manifested by it. If you have reversed it, but you go back to the lifestyle that made you ill, you're going to get ill again. So that's why I'm so happy and so optimistic about this lifestyle and leading a low insulin lifestyle, because it's sustainable and you can do it for the rest of your life. So in closing, I just want to encourage you to grab some labs. If you have no idea if you have insulin resistance, the physical symptoms that I was talking about before, like always being hungry, energy energy crashes, preoccupation with food, not being able to lose weight, skin rashes or skin tags, the signs of insulin resistance. Those are the major ones. And of course, weight gain would be another one. And then if you have any of the diseases I talked about, you have insulin resistance. But looking for those physical symptoms. And then as far as labs go, at the bare minimum, asking for a fasting glucose, a fasting insulin, a hemoglobin A1C, that will give you, an idea of where you're at for insulin resistance. And if you need help interpreting those values, I have guides and freebies that are in the show notes that you can grab. And then if you have a lipid panel looking at the HDL and the triglycerides, so you're taking your triglycerides, dividing by HDL, that ratio should be less than 1.5. If it's not, if you have high triglycerides, low HDL, that's another indication of some pretty major metabolic issues and insulin resistance. When I look at a cholesterol panel, I'm not honed in on the LDL like conventional medicine is. I am looking at triglycerides and HDL because those are what is telling me about a metabolic disease. And then another thing you can do at home right now is take a waist circumference. Females should be less than 35 inches, males less than 40 inches. If you're accumulating fat around the midsection, that's an indication of metabolic health issues and insulin resistance because you're storing your fat around the organs, and that's not good. That's not something that we want happening. So that, and then checking your blood pressure. Blood pressure under 120 over 80. Again, high blood pressure is typically a manifestation of high insulin levels and insulin resistance. So looking at all of those factors collectively will give you a really good indication of where you're at for metabolic disease and insulin resistance. If you need help resolving insulin resistance, of course, I have all kinds of courses and resources for you. I work directly with my students inside Low Insulin Academy. That's all linked in the show notes. I would encourage you to enroll in one of those courses that are in the show notes so I can help you more directly and we can together reverse your insulin resistance. It can happen, but I don't want you going back to your old lifestyle because it will resurface. So hope you learned a lot today. I'll see you back next week for another episode.